All right, we're back talking about urban water supply, and now we're going to talk about the first due engine taking their own hydrant and some of the things that you need to think about. So there may be times when the first due engine decides that instead of doing a forward lay, that there is a hydrant that's close enough to the building that's on fire for them to be able to utilize that. So for the sake of this discussion, we're going to say that this is the first due engine. They've decided to take this hydrant. So they've pulled past the hydrant so as to be able to use their rear intake and their soft sleeve, which again is what we want to see optimally. They have been careful to leave room in front of the fire building for the ladder truck. So there may be times when, even though that there's a hydrant that's very accessible to the fire building, you may want to choose to lay out from another hydrant instead, just because if you do take that hydrant, that you're not going to leave room for the ladder truck. So that's something that you need to think about. So they've taken their own hydrant. Now they've stretched the line. They're going to be fighting fire. So the question comes up, well, what does the second due engine do? So we think it's probably a best practice for the second due engine to identify a third hydrant that would be available for supplying water for the fire tech. So remember that the third due engine is going to be calling out their own hydrant so as to accomplish water supply to the rear of the building. And that's fine. So the second due engine, when he's thinking about that, should probably consider another hydrant. So for the sake of argument, we're going to say that the third due engine identified this hydrant. The second due officer figured out that if there's an emergency, he could probably utilize this hydrant. But it's probably best practice for him to come up and co-locate with the first due engine. So again, that depends on access. It depends on the ability to leave access for other units. But if he's able to co-locate, that allows for him to provide redundancies for the first due engine. So what are the things that can go wrong? Well, the first due engine could have a pump failure. So in that instance, the second due engine very quickly could stretch a supply line to the first due engine and pump off his tank water, give up his tank water, while he then goes ahead and figures out his water supply. So if you trimmed out the butt of the hydrant like you're supposed to on a heavy water hookup, that becomes very easy for the second due engine to run a supply line off of that. He can then start taking intake from that hydrant, and he can pump through the first due engine. As the operations continue, if he needs more water supply, he can work towards switching over the steamer connection on the hydrant to his own intake instead of the first due engines. If the hydrant is dead and both engines are here, then you need to think about other options. So because the second due engine had already identified a hydrant, he could then communicate with the fifth due engine. I need you to take the hydrant at the corner of Main and Apple. You would need to be able to get a supply line from here to there. So whether that's hand jacked or reverse laid, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, is up to you to manage. But at least that way you've already thought about that and you've already figured out how to overcome this issue. So again, we're talking about best practices with taking your own hydrant. Again, the second due's job is to support the first due engine and think about what could go wrong and to have a plan B in place.